Let us offer our consecration to the Lord. Lord, we offer up to you this day as we finish the working week of the second week of Easter. Let us prepare ourselves for the third Sunday of Easter and prepare ourselves to be filled more with your love and your joy as we continue our walk towards Pentecost. And we ask this through Christ our Lord. Well, today's reading is a famous one. This is from obviously all the readings in Easter are from the Acts of the Apostles. So this is from the continuing in the 5th chapter of the Acts of the Apostles. I just want to give you a little tangent. Technically, no one really pushes this because it's very hard to explain this to the people. But during Easter season, the 7 weeks of Easter, when you do a funeral, you should only use the New Testament readings. You know, you'll go and people look for an Old Testament reading, New Testament reading, and the Gospel, which is the case for all but the Easter season. However, during the Easter season, you're called to focus on the New Testament readings of the Acts of the Apostles and the epistles, which are the letters. If you may remember that term from a long time ago. The epistles, which are the letters, which is what epistle means, by the way. It means letter in Greek. And then you have the gospel. So if, unfortunately, you have to experience a funeral during this time and the priest says, well, no, you can't use an Old Testament reading, that's where it comes from. A lot of times we don't, because it's a very hard thing to explain to people who are in the midst of their grief. You just kind of let it go. Even though, obviously, we shouldn't. We should do it in that certain way sometimes I've had other situations where people will want a New Testament reading, and they'll say, they won't let me have this New Testament reading. I'll go, what is the New Testament reading? And they'll go, and they'll show me something from like the Gospel of John. And I'll say, well, no, because that is a New Testament reading, but it's part of the Gospels, and that can only be read in the Gospels. And then they have to explain that, yes, you're right, it's a New Testament reading, but it's only to be read during the Gospels. So just so you know, if that happens to come up during this time, if unfortunately you have to be part of a funeral and people say, well, no, you should only use the Acts of the Apostles during this time and the Gospels only are read during the Gospels, you'll know where that comes from. And you know that they're not just giving you a hard time. Well, today's first reading from the Acts of the Apostles is a powerful one because it really does the crux of what we believe. And it's the explanation by Gamaliel. And Gamaliel explains something very simple. And it really highlights a lot of this. If this is not from God, it's not going to last. Really simple. So he says, don't get yourself so worked up over these people who are preaching the gospel of, this whole Jesus, what they would call Christus at this time, or Yeshua. That you're preaching on this Jesus and you're all upset and you don't like what they're preaching. Let it go. Because if you don't let it go, and it is from God, you're never going to stop it. But if it isn't from a God, it's slowly going to go away. So let it go. And that's an important thing. And it really shows that the Lord is showing them to allow other signs in which to follow this. So, in other words, they're trying to stop this and saying, no, there are other signs there. Look for those other signs. And let them happen. Just let it go. Because if you fight it, you may make it worse. We have an expression that I learned in the Navy. I use it all the time. Don't win the battle and lose the war. And what that literally means is you're fighting a battle and you want to defeat someone because they're doing something that you don't like, and then you realize that once you defeat them, that it makes the situation worse. Maybe because you got so riled up about this, you've lost a friend or you've lost a relative, and you go, oh, gee, I won the battle, but I lost the war, and you don't want to do that. This is one of the things that you recognize is going on in this reality. That's basically what Gamaliel is saying. Let it go. Because if this is truly from the Lord, it'll show itself. And if it isn't, it'll show itself, and let it go. So don't fight the battle. Let it happen. And so there is that wisdom and that powerful wisdom that we recognize going, one of the things that we may encounter in our spiritual life is disputes with other people who believe different things and don't believe the way we may believe on little things. And sometimes it's the little things that make the big fights. As the saying goes, the devil is in the details, which is so true. And if you get drawn into these fights, you lose. And this is one of the things that I learned from an early pastor who explained that to me. If you get drawn into fights, you lose. Let me give you an example. Now, I am not part of this kind of thinking, but you hear of this happening. Let's say, for example, that I believe everyone should receive communion on the hand, so they should never receive communion on the tongue. I am not of that thinking, but I'm just saying hypothetically, because you hear of stories of this happens. And someone who believes that they only want to receive communion on the tongue, they won't receive it in the hand. And so you have this clash where someone comes up to receive communion and they stick out their tongue, and the priest says, no, you have to stick out your hand or I won't give it to you. And you have this battle. Well, who wins? Virtually nobody. Who loses? Well, the priest does from square one, because the person then goes complains to other people. We'll talk more on the other side of the break.
You can now leave a message for us, which we can air and discuss on this program. Just call 617-297-7452.
That's 617-297-7452.
617-297-7452. Feel free to call, leave a comment, a question, or even feedback, and we may play it on the air. I can discuss your comment or question as well, so give that a try.
617-297-7452, 617-297-7452.
And don't forget our website, CatholicAudiomedia.com. That's CatholicAudiomedia.com. Check that out. You can connect to the parish. Remember, you have a standing invitation to our 10 o'clock a.m. Mass on Sundays. I'm thinking of maybe adding another Mass in the evening. If you have any thoughts on that, let me know. But we're kind of thinking along those lines. Right now, we do have a 7 o'clock p.m. Mass in Portuguese, from Brazilian Portuguese. But obviously, if you're listening to this program and you don't speak Brazilian Portuguese, you may not be interested in the Mass. Just saying. But anyway, so you may have this clash, and I talked to you just before the break of, we'll say, someone who only wants to receive communion on the tongue, and there's the priest there, and he only wants to give it in the hand, and he says, no, unless you receive in the hand, then go away. Well, who wins and who loses there? Well, the priest doesn't win. He won the battle, but he lost the war, because then they're going to go complain to someone. They're going to go complain to one of these national ministries that have an agenda, and they're fighting their battle, and they'll say, see what happened at such and such parish, and the next thing you know, you have people protesting outside. Why? Because you didn't give them communion on the tongue. Is that acceptable? Yes, that's the option. There's two options, on the hand or on the tongue. Those are the two options. And if someone wants it on the tongue, you give it to them on the tongue. And the reverse is also true. There are people that say you should only receive on the tongue, you shouldn't receive on the hand, and that's what they're the whole da 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 da. And maybe I'll tell you a funny story. And no, it's just, don't get involved in those battles. Let it go, because as you learn from Gamaliel, it doesn't work. It doesn't go anywhere, and it just causes more problems. I had a situation that, although was unique, and that was the case of a man who insisted that he received communion in his hat, which is not one of the options by any stretch of the imagination. Well, the problem was, and I was kind of new at the priesthood at the time, the problem was the guy, he felt he had some kind of contagious disease, and he was afraid that if we gave him communion on the tongue or on his hand, that we would contract this contagious disease, and therefore people would die from what he had. Well, and he kept complaining, and give it to me in the hat. And I'm not going to give you communion in the hat. And I remember the guy, he looked like he was about 56 years old. And finally, we had this big argument in the rectory. Not like yelling at each other, but we had an argument. And finally, he looks at me. He said, "Do you know how old I am?" And I said, "No, I have no idea. Maybe about 56. He says, "I'm 85 years old." And I realized right then and there that, I mean, literally, I had no idea this guy was the 85. And I'm one of these people that has tremendous respect for those who are older than me. So, I mean, I've always been brought up with that idea, and you always said, and I was like, I felt I did the right thing by saying, no, I can't give you communion in the hat. But at the same time, I'm arguing with an 85-year-old who's sincere about going to church, but was afraid he had some kind of disease. And doctors examined him and found that, in fact, he didn't. But eventually, further tests revealed he had a form of lung cancer, and he died after that. Tragic story, but it also brings us back to sometimes we just wish we didn't have to argue about certain things. Although, I had to maintain what was right about the Eucharist. We'll talk more tomorrow. Have a blessed day.
I want to call your attention to Catholic TV, which offers great faith-filled, family-friendly programming 24 hours a day. You can find your cable channel at www.getcatholictv.com, and you can watch online on the free apps or check out the YouTube channel. Daily Mass, Rosaries, the Divine Mercy Chaplet, and the Our Lady of Perpetual Help Novena are all available online and on demand. Check out CatholicTV.com. If you would like to support our program, please consider a donation to St. Anthony Parish in Allston, Massachusetts. There are several ways to consider this. One is to purchase any of our merchandise, which you can find at the shopping tab at CatholicAudiomedia.com. That's CatholicAudiomedia.com. There are coffee mugs there. There's also my latest book, Encounter Christ in Your Humanity, all of which you can find at the shopping tab at CatholicAudiomedia.com. You can also donate to the show directly through either the Donate tab, also at CatholicAudiomedia.com, or by sending a donation through the U.S. Postal Service with your questions and comments at 43 Holton Street, Allston, Massachusetts, 02134. That's St. Anthony Parish, 43 Holton Street, Allston, Massachusetts, 02134. Finally, the best way you can support our parish is to attend Mass on Sundays at 10 o'clock and be a part of our parish. We thank you for any support you would like to give to St. Anthony Parish in Allston, Massachusetts, the sponsoring parish for this media outreach to Catholics and other Christians in the WROL, WEZE, and podcast listening audience. In Cristo vivimos.